yelling and screaming during a football game, and I was supposed to. So, and I was the loudest. I played as loud as I could. I screamed as loud as I could. I usually didn't have a voice the next day or two. By the time I was a senior in high school, I would lose my voice regularly at football games, and even get this, a Rangers game. Can you get that excited about a baseball game? I can. Okay. So anyway, when I was in high school, I was very excitable, and in a football game, my junior year is a playoff game, and like any young man who's playing football, I yelled and screamed and headbutted with the best. But this year, my junior year, I was on the sidelines because this is an important game, and they wanted all the best. And not that I wasn't good. I was good. I wasn't the best at that time. And I had a lot of energy. I was excited. And I don't remember at what point in the game, but our star running back, his name was Rodney Lucky. This guy was built like a tank. He ran like a tank. He was tackled like he was a tank. You have like half the team, the other team, holding on to him and finally tripping him so that he would fall. During our district games, we rarely ever lost anything because we didn't have to block. He'd just run over everybody. But anyway, we weren't doing well that game. And so he turns to the band and says, "Play Rocky, play Rocky." And so in my enthusiasm and my excitement and energy, I turn around and I just start shouting, "Play Rocky, play Rocky," for who knows how long. Eventually they did play Rocky. But then, of course, as I left my high school, I was known as Rocky. And there's other reasons for that as well, but we won't go into that tonight. But lots of times we do silly things, or we're willing to go a long way for the things that we care about, things that we're loyal to, or causes that we're loyal to, or our football teams, or our basketball teams, or anything that we're excited about. So before we get into this, some definitions that I'm going to put out before you, and if you want to make any comments, please do so. When we talk about nationalism, we need to kind of define what that is. So there is a healthy kind of patriotism that involves gratitude for our country in which we live in. We have pride in its good points, and we need to consider its flaws, right? In everything. If you don't do that even for yourself, that's a problem. We need to always consider our good sides and our bad sides to understand who we are so we can overcome those things, right? And patriotism also involves a loyalty when it's appropriate. Nationalism is often a blind loyalty. It's my country, right or wrong. And an unjust belief that our country is, that's what nationalism is. I'm not saying that we believe that, but an unjust belief, justified belief, that our country is in every way superior to all others. In the Christian realm, this often involves a belief that your nation is somehow specially favored by God and enjoys a special status. This next part, I may skip. I'll read a few of these. I really didn't get what I wanted in here, but I'm going to read a few quotes that people have used, or at least I'm going to use two quotes that people have used. People that I admire, but have used thoughts and phrases to talk about our nation that, in a sense, it could be offensive. Maybe you appreciate it. Maybe you don't. I don't know. We'll see. The first one is from George W. Bush. It says, "There's a power, a wonder-working power, in the goodness and idealism and faith of the American people." And what does that recall to your mind? What does that bring to mind? It's a song, right? Power in the blood. And it's almost equating our idealism and the American people to that power in the blood. And I think we should have We should have problems with that. We should have problems if we do that. Or at least be cognizant of it, thinking about it. Is that something we really need to say? In 2020, during that election, I had a problem with, I was watching Fox News, and I saw Kennedy speaking, and it was the end of his show, and at the end of his show, he said these words. I believe it was these words, but it was to this idea, and it really bothered me. It said, "Let not your heart be troubled." Election coverage will continue after this. Now, let me tell you, people, what is so exciting about election coverage that it's going to make you feel better when it's over? I've never felt better after listening to election coverage. And so, that called to mind, I mean, immediately when I heard those words, "Let not your heart be troubled." Who said that? Jesus. To his disciples as he's leaving. In John chapter 14, verse 27 through 28, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful. You heard that I said to you, I go away, and I will come to you. If you love me, you would have rejoiced with my Father, for the Father is greater than I." He goes on during this time period, he's talking about, I'm going to make a place for you. I mean, that's joyful. That's good news to not be fearful about. I'm going away, and there's going to be a pause, because there's something better coming. And so, number one, well, that really irritated me so much. I don't usually interact with media people, but I emailed his email, and of course never got anything back. But that bothered me. I love my nation. I mean, I'm wearing, and I partially did this on purpose, I work for the United States government as a contractor for the B-1 flight simulation program. I love it. It's a great job. The most important thing about my job is making sure that the people that we serve are safe, that they are the best at what they do, and that they are able to practice something important to them and come home safely. That's my job, is to make sure that they have the best equipment for that. So where this really gets down to, we're going to talk about a story from the Bible, of course, always good. We're going to talk about Jonah. Now, oftentimes when we think about Jonah, we, in some ways, maybe you don't do this. With the kids, sometimes we do, where we read through the first, for the first 2 chapters, and the lesson is, don't run away from God, obey Him. Because He's going to spit you out anyway. Anyway, bad joke. But this ignores the second half of the book and the broader point that it's trying to make. Why is it that Jonah ran away from God, obeying God? Why is it? Does anybody remember? We'll talk about it again later, but he did not want those people to be saved. Why did he not want those people to be saved? He didn't like them. They weren't Jews. They were the bad guys. The time and setting of Jonah's story, Assyria was the looming wicked empire whose capital city was Nineveh. Nineveh is described as, in daunting terms, as very large, and indeed, like the very fact that Jonah, how long does it take Jonah to walk across the whole city of Nineveh to preach his
3 days.
3 days. Now, if you look at old cities, like ancient cities, like if you were to just say, if you didn't say 3 days, in an ancient city, that, like, well, teach in the city, okay, that's fine. You look at like a place like Jericho, if you look at it, it doesn't look like that would be that hard to walk. You're not going to take 3 days to walk across Jericho. But a city that's big enough that for you to preach to the whole city, you're going to walk across it and reach everybody in 3 days. And it takes that long to preach. And he's got a simple lesson. Repent, or doom is at hand. That's how large this place is. In other words, Nineveh is big. It's a big, threatening empire whose people are not God's people. And I didn't write this down, but there's a passage in Ezekiel that in chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3 of Ezekiel, that says, I'm not sending you to your own people or to a people far away with a different tongue because they would listen to you. I'm sending you to your own people because they won't listen to you. In this case, Jonah is being sent to people that do not know God. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, it says, The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, preach against it, because their wickedness has confronted me. However, Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. And this isn't in there, but what is it? This is not part of my lesson, but I like to have little sidetracks, obviously. In ancient times, what did most religions think the domain of their God was? How broad do you think that Egyptians really saw their God's space? Like, what areas did he reside in?
The ruling class, the leaders.
Right, and their leaders, but also, in a sense, they really were confined to Egypt, weren't they? Well, they didn't expect to find their gods up in Canaan. Not really. They looked at their gods as if they were territorial. Well, what does he say here? He says, I figured out how to use this. From the Lord's presence. How far do you have to go to get from the Lord's presence? There's only one place you can go to get that far. You don't know that. That's not a joke either. So Jonah flees, heading the opposite direction. But as we know, that plan doesn't work. A storm hits Jonah's boat. He's thrown overboard. God sends a fish to rescue him. What is the message God told Jonah to speak? Was it good news or bad news? It's bad news. Bad news. Just like in Ezekiel, he says, he tells him to swallow a scroll, and Ezekiel takes it and says it's it's written on front and back, written with lamentations, mourning, and woe. That's oftentimes what prophets are bringing us. Sad news. Jonah chapter 3, verse 1 says, Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, preach the message that I tell you. So Jonah got up and went to Nineveh according to the Lord's command. Now Nineveh was an extremely large city, a 3-day walk. Jonah set out on the first day of his walk in the city and proclaimed, In 40 days Nineveh will be demolished. The men of Nineveh believed in God. They proclaimed a fast and dressed in sackcloth from the greatest of them to the least. When the word reached the king of Nineveh, he got up from his throne and took off his royal robe, put on sackcloth and sat in ashes. Then he issued a decree in Nineveh. By the order of the king and his nobles, no man or beast, herd or flock is to taste anything at all. They must not eat or drink water. Furthermore, both man and beast must be covered with sackcloth. Everyone must call out earnestly to God. Each must turn from his evil ways and from the violence he is doing. Who knows? God may turn and relent. He may turn from his burning anger so that we will not perish. Then God saw their actions, that they had turned from their evil ways. So God relented from the disaster he had threatened to do to them, and he did not do it. But Jonah was greatly displeased and became furious, and he prayed to the Lord, "Please, Lord, isn't this what I said while I was still in my own country? That's why I fled to Tarshish in the first place. I knew that you are merciful and compassionate God, slow to become angry, rich in faithful love, and one who relents from sending disaster. And now, Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." Do you think Jonah was expecting this reaction from the Ninevites? Maybe, though. I mean, because he didn't want this reaction from the Ninevites, that's for sure. Because if there's a chance that these people will listen to me, I don't want to go. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he didn't want them to respond this way, did he? Why was he displeased? We've kind of talked about this again. But we'll just, why would Jonah be displeased with their reaction?
They were the mortal enemy of the Jews.
But hold on. They didn't want them to be saved?
They were the mortal enemies of the Jews.
The mortal enemies of the Jews. I mean, they were overrunning everyone. You look at the stories of Assyria coming and destroying Israel. It's terrible. It's disgusting. They were not afraid of God at that time.
He didn't think they were worthy.
He didn't think that they were worthy. And whether he thought they were worthy or not, he didn't want them to be worthy of it. He's our God, right? That's the attitude. Shouldn't he be celebrating their repentance? And that's the obvious question. It's interesting that Jonah, in all this, he's quoting what God says about himself. When he says, "You are merciful and compassionate, slow to become angry, rich in faithful love." And that's how God describes himself. When he describes himself to Moses on the mountain, that's how he describes himself. And that is who our God is. You know, the world looks at our God and sees him as easily angered, ready to destroy. He's ready to hurl thunder and lightning and boulders at you for your sin. That's what he wants to do. That's what the world says. That's not true. What underlying beliefs about Israel and other nations do you think that Jonah has, or seemed to have, behind this frustration? Again, it's probably something that we've already kind of talked about. But
Chosen people.
God chose people, and they were, weren't they? They were, and that's true. But what did it mean to be chosen? Is it because they were something special, or because he was planning something special? Now we have the opportunity to look from here back and see what God was doing. Maybe Jonah didn't have that sight. And he didn't really care at the time. Now, next we're going to go to Jeremiah. And Judah had a false sense of safety at the time of Jeremiah. Right after Jeremiah starts preaching during the time of Josiah. And when he's on the scene, Israel is reaching the end of its era of self-governing as a kingdom. At this time, we find the prophet warning God's people in Judah about their wickedness and their impending judgment. The people are outwardly wicked and unjust, and yet they have a belief that God will not abandon his presence at his temple in Jerusalem. This leads them to a formulaic saying that we will read in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 4, that gave them a false assurance. And go ahead and read that within its context. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand in the gate of the house of the Lord, and there call out this word. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah, who enter through these gates to worship the Lord. This Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says, correct your ways and your deeds, and I will allow you to live in this place. Do not trust in deceitful words, chanting, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Instead, if you really change your ways and your actions, if you act justly toward one another, if you no longer oppress the foreigner or the fatherless, the widow, and no longer shed innocent blood in this place or follow other gods, bringing harm on yourself, I will allow you to live in this place, the land that I gave your ancestors long ago and forever. But look, you keep trusting in deceitful words that cannot help. So what I was referring to earlier, they say, where is it? This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. So, don't you get it? We're God's people. We can't be destroyed. And Jeremiah says over and over again, it's not going to work. You're not living right. You can say whatever you want. You can claim to follow God, but if your actions aren't proceeding from if they're not following Him, if you're not following Him, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you think of that temple. It doesn't matter how amazing it is. It doesn't matter that His presence is there. Because you're not following Him. You're not obeying Him. You're not keeping His promises. What problems or sins does Jeremiah name here? Pride. Injustice. Oppression. Who is he oppressing? We talked about this before. Who are those being oppressed? Verse 5.
Foreigners, fatherless, and widows.
Yep. That is important to God, people. Innocent blood. The foreigner, the fatherless, in other words, orphans, and widows. That always comes up with God. Those are three groups of people that always matter to God. To make sure, because they don't have anybody to look out for them, to look out for their interests. The first thing he says, though, I should have written it down. It's verse 6. Maybe it's verse 5, actually. If you act justly towards one another. First problem, they're not living justly with one another. They're not loving each other the way that they should. And along with that, really, when you say, like, the other three, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, no longer shed innocent blood, all of those things follow from not loving one another. If we're not even going to treat each other well, we're not going to treat these other people well. And then the final thing is that he brings out is that you're following other gods. And you're bringing the judgment on yourself. This chanting of this phrase, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. What kind of, I mean, what does that make you think about their beliefs or what they're thinking at this time? They're idols, like God maybe to them is like an idol, maybe, or they're really just thinking about their idol.
They had lowered their standards to the point where they actually had idols in the courtyard right at the very
sense that the temple can almost become an idol to them. The temple has become to them, in this case, kind of like an idol. A special idol, because they really believe, and I think they know, that there's something different about that than anything else, but they didn't really fear the Lord.
Well, Jeremiah told them, and told them.
And told them.
And what did they do? They said, we will not listen, and they threw him in a mud pit.
Yeah,
And these were the leaders
yeah.
that did that to him.
But Jeremiah was safe in that mud pit. He was rescued from the mud pit too. And he had a tough job. I don't know that I'd ever want a prophet's job. So what's the disconnect between the people's wicked actions and their belief in God? This is an open-ended question. I have no answer for myself. We're just going to continue. Think about it. What is the disconnect between these people's actions and their belief that God is still?
Perhaps it was their actions were out of repetition and tradition, but their hearts, like what they were doing, were never actually in it. And so, hence, any type of action that they displayed, it was only anything that replicated religion or spirituality or closeness to God was only from what they knew they were supposed to do. But the things that they did that they weren't supposed to do is where their heart really was. They weren't actually connected.
So perhaps it was more the ritual of following God, and not the heart of it. And we see kind of that over and over again. It can happen from generation to generation. It's so important for us to pass on what we know, not just what we know, because our knowledge, like these people had knowledge, they didn't have faith. And the problem, if you have knowledge and no faith in God, then you have no God. And that's their problem.
The children of Israel that came out of Egypt had the fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. These people watched 185,000 men die in one night. They saw Joshua take people into the promised land and inherit it because they did what God told them to do, and yet they still fell away. So when you get the main picture, they didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
They did what they wanted to do, and what God told them to do really didn't matter.
Yeah. Well,
They had all of these signs and wonders that God did. They saw His blessings. They experienced His curses, which He told them were coming.
yeah.
They still didn't pay attention.
I mean, if you read back in the first 5 books of the Bible, it's very clear God had prepared for this day. So it was like by the time of Josiah, when Josiah reads the book of God and says, "Oh no, what have we done? Let's change everything." Why? Because he saw it was written of old of what would happen today, and he knew where they were, he knew where they needed to go, and so they changed. But then right after his generation, they lost that. And that's very sad.
I want to kind of go back to what the opening was about Christian nationalists. I think that is a tremendous threat because people are putting their focus in the wrong place. Most people are putting their focus on this country that we live in. As you said earlier, this is a great country. I'm not trying to get a passport to go somewhere else. But the truth is, you cannot have two masters. And this is a case where I really believe these people are putting country above Christ. And I also believe that if we're not careful, we are making Christianity a commodity. I mean, it's just a commodity. It's almost like salt. It's everywhere. So if I'm running for something, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
If I'm doing this, I'm a Christian. It's just like sprinkling salt on something. So
To make it taste better, right?
well, yeah, I mean, it makes it a little more palatable to say that, yeah, I'm doing this and I'm a Christian. And so when people begin to look for Christianity, there's somebody out there that wants to find their way to Christ. They may really get the wrong concept because of what has been telling
Mhm.
as Christianity.
Yeah.
And
And so, I mean, and this goes back, so I'm going to follow that. Floyd's point basically is, well, Floyd's point is God is number one. Period. And this is a point that I haven't written down, but I have it in my head, and I'm going to do it right now because I need to. Number one, I am a Christian. First and foremost. I am not a Sumners first. I'm a Christian first. I can't be in my family first. What does Jesus say that he came? He didn't come into the world to bring peace. He came into the world to bring sword that would divide between family, because we have to make a choice, right? That's important. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. I must be. Jesus is my Lord, and I will follow him. I am then a Sumners, and I have to take care of my family. And from that, it grows. And I'm not going to go any further than that right now. But first and foremost, I'm a Christian, before I am even a Sumners. I'm going to keep going because I want to get to the good stuff. John chapter 3, verse 16, we see the story of Nicodemus unfolding. Nicodemus comes to Jesus. He wants to understand something different about you. I need to know what it is. His concluding thoughts that Jesus gives him is, for God loved the world in this way, that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world that he might condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. Anyone who believes in him is not condemned, but anyone who does not believe is already condemned, because he has not believed in the name of the one and only Son of God. This, then, is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and the people loved darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone who has practiced wicked things hates the light and avoids it, so that his deeds may not be exposed. But anyone who lives by the truth comes to the light, so that his works may be shown to be accomplished by God. Why did Jesus come to this earth? Verse 17. God did not send his Son into the world that he would condemn the world. Remember, what is the world's view of God? He is up there looking, spying out to see when you're going to mess up so that he can throw rocks at you. That's the view of the world. Who is that really? That's Satan. Satan's the one looking out for your mistakes. He's the one that wants to see you trip and stumble, fall on your face, and then point it out to God. But God wants what? Send his Son into the world that the world might be saved. Who? Everybody. I was listening to a sermon this morning on the way to work, and I heard a gentleman say that everyone we look at, we need to see as souls. Every single person we look at. Every single person. From a murderer to a child. It's a soul. that can be saved. Needs salvation. Every single soul. And we need to see everybody that way. And sometimes we see things through the wrong eyes. We hear things and we're thinking about the wrong things. Acts chapter 10, there's a story about, that's very familiar to us, a centurion by the name of Cornelius. He believed in God and supported the local Jewish congregation by building them a synagogue. And one day he received a vision from God telling him to send for Peter to come to him. And Peter was not going, had not been going to anyone but Jews at that time to tell them the gospel. God had sent Peter a vision. Most of us, I'm sure, are fairly familiar with this. And he was seeing unclean things, and God was telling him to take and eat. He said, no, I can't do this. But at the end of his vision, confused, the people that Cornelius sends arrive, and God says to Peter, go with them. And so Peter goes. In Acts chapter 10, verse 34 through 36, it says, After Peter hears the story of Cornelius' conversation or vision from God, Peter begins to speak and say, now I really understand that God does not show favoritism, but in every nation the person who fears him and does righteousness is acceptable to him. He sent the message to the Israelites to proclaim the good news of peace through Christ Jesus. He is Lord of all. So what is the nationality of the people that God desires to save? What nation? All nations. All nations. Now I'm going to say something that may offend you. This is when it's going to be hard. And I apologize if I offend you. But when you see people crossing the border into this nation, do you see souls? Or do you see enemies? Think about it. I'm not saying that it's not an atrocity or it's not wrong. I'm saying, do you see souls? When millions of people are coming into your nation and you don't know what's going on, that's a problem. I acknowledge that. But are they souls to you? Or are they enemies? You need to think about that. Who is your God? Who does he save? Even those people. And if I whisper too softly, I apologize. That's for dramatic emphasis. There was another centurion in Matthew chapter 8. It's an amazing story. Jesus is on his approach. He says, the centurion basically tells him, you don't need to come to my house. I need you to heal my servant. But if you are who you claim to be and who you seem to be, you can do this anywhere. You are obviously capable. And when Jesus hears this, it says that he was amazed and said to those who were following him, I assure you, I have not found anyone in Israel. And I'm going to put James's comments, my chosen people, with so great a faith. I tell you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now the Israelites couldn't see anybody but themselves in God's kingdom. They couldn't see anybody but themselves in God's kingdom. They couldn't see even the Samaritans, who knew God better than anyone else outside of Israel. And they definitely couldn't see Greeks. They were all pagans to them. But Jesus had something more in mind. Well, why did Jesus go to Israel in the first place? Why did he go to Israel? It's kind of simple. Maybe it's not simple, but why did he go to Israel? Because God chose them. Were they special? Yes. Why were they special? Was it because they were so great? The Israelites proved that they weren't anything special. Over and over. We watch a series that's like of puppets done by the people who used to do VeggieTales, called What's in the Bible with Buck Denver, and it's entertaining and interesting. But when they talk about judges, they have a cycle of apostasy. And so it's like, everything's good, everything's great, and then we turn away, and then everything's bad, and then we got to send somebody, and then that guy destroys the bad guys, and the bad guys run away, and then everybody's happy with God again, and then they turn away, and that's the Jews. But which one of us is any different than the Jews? Even in our own lives, we have that cycle of apostasy, don't we? Why did he choose to go to the Jews? Because that was his plan. It was the perfect place, the perfect time for him to come, so that you and I would get to know about Jesus today, that everything would align just right. He didn't choose the Jews because they were special. The Jews were special because they were chosen. And we're special because we're chosen. But also we chose to follow. And anyone can choose to follow. Anyone can be part of our family. Jesus says here, where are the people going to come from that are going to sit at Abraham's table? East and west. What does that mean? Again, everybody, Larry, Mr. Sarcasm. I actually made it to the end of my notes before the end of the class. This is crazy. So, if you believe this, what changes for you? What changes for you? If you believe that God, that He loves you. The point is, again, I'm going to go through it in my head. I wrote it down in my brain. Okay? Number one, I have chosen to take on the name of Christ. I bear His name. I wear Him. I put on Him as a robe. He's given that to me so that I can be His, seen as His by God. And then I'm going to Summers, because that is my family. And I have to take care of my family. And what do I do after I take care of my family? Well, now I have the church. The church is also my family. So I need to take care of the church. I need to take care of people at church. And beyond the church, I have my city. This is my home. I need to take care of people here. I need to see the souls in Abilene. Beyond Abilene, I need to see the souls of Texas. Beyond Texas, I need to see the souls of America. And beyond America, I need to see the souls of the whole world. We are all in the same boat together. Or at least we could be. I guess you and I are in the same boat. And we want to have the whole world get into that boat, don't we? God has a house full of rooms, or a city full of houses, and a table full of seats. And He wants the table to be filled, the feast to be eaten, and He wants everybody to be part of it. And we need to be joyful about that. You know, and so maybe to you this doesn't seem that serious, but it seems like in this day and age, I don't know if I'm going to, I didn't know if I was actually going to use this. I am apparently a card-carrying Republican. And I hold this up because I didn't want this card. Because I'm not a Republican. You know why I'm not a Republican? Because I am a Christian. I do not let anybody determine my values but God. Please, please do not. This is James speaking, and I haven't had enough sleep, and so my filter is off. And that may be a good thing. But my God is the one that I love. between me and him, no priest, and no politician, no one else. We must follow God. And look at everything through his eyes, not through our eyes, not through our worldly eyes. Look at everything through his eyes, through Scripture. Fill your heart with it. Follow him. Do you see the world through his eyes? I know I don't always. I don't always see people through his eyes. In fact, today I was very angry with somebody at work. I didn't see a soul. I saw someone to be angry with. But we are his people, and we let him determine our actions. We let him determine what we think and left sides of things, and the truth is, we need to talk. Because love doesn't always look right. And right isn't always love. Be careful. Trust in God. Follow him. And now I'm done. Next week we'll be talking about pride and humility. Thank you.